Good morning, everyone. My name is Jon Lentz. I'm the editor-in-chief of City and State Magazine, and thrilled to be here today with Deputy Mayor Richard Buery. Let's give him a hand again. And all morning, we've been talking about diversity and the many manifestations of that. Looking back to this past September, Mayor Bill de Blasio announced the creation of a new mayor's office of MWBEs. He set a target of 30% of city contracts going to MWBEs by 2021, and he named you as the director of this new program. So in the past, I guess, 6 months or 8 months, 9 months, what have you accomplished so far with this new initiative?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Can you all hear me? Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to see everyone on a beautiful day. Hopefully, we got some clouds, but no rain yet. So, but it's good to see you all. And it's very important. I'm glad that you're having this conversation. It's obviously a very important conversation at any time, but certainly an important conversation today. As you said, we have set an ambitious goal for ourselves to achieve 30% utilization of minority and women business enterprises in our city contracting. That is an ambitious goal. We started at 8% when we came into office, and we have seen steady progress. So I think my short answer to the question is that we are doing very well. We went from 8% when we came into office. We were at 14% utilization, 14.3% at the end of the last fiscal year. And we, as of halfway through the current fiscal year, as of the second quarter, we were at 18%. So we are making steady and strong progress. I think the main issue for me when I think about this program and why it's so important, the name that today's forum is on diversity. And diversity is for me not quite a strong enough word to get at what we're trying to get at here. We're really talking about equity. We're talking about having a city that functions well for everyone, a city that honors and takes advantage of the skills and talents that everyone has to offer. In a city like this, which is filled with so much diversity, immigrants, people of color, women, the truth of the matter is that New York City has not fully taken advantage of all the talents and the resources that all these communities bring to the table. This has not been a city that has always been open for business. It has not been a city that has stood committed to true opportunity. You know, we're often okay with programs that are designed to support people, an educational program, but when it comes to programs that are really designed to drive true economic power, to make sure that all of our communities have access to wealth, are creating jobs, our commitment, when we think about diversity, our commitment to diversity does not always go that far. And I think for our administration, what we're committed to is a vision of diversity, a vision of equity, that is truly about bringing true economic equity and power and justice to every community in New York City. It's hard work, but we think we are making tremendous progress.
Sure, certainly. And state law actually governs a lot of what New York City is able to do. And just last week, the state legislature passed legislation sponsored by State Senator Marisol Alcantara and Assemblywoman Alicia Hinman that will give you more leeway to award discretionary contracts, also use best value contracting. How important is this for the city to get to that 30% goal?
Well, I mean, incredibly important. I really want to give a hand, I don't know what the funny thing today, but I want to give a hand to Albany, to the legislature for passing this bill overwhelmingly. And the Senate, it was actually unanimously adopted by the Senate, and to have the New York State Senate unanimously adopt a bill designed to improve economic opportunity for women and people of color is truly historic. It was also passed overwhelmingly by the Assembly, I think 115 to 15. So just to step back, in order to increase opportunity, there are a bunch of things that we need to do to make sure that minority women businesses have actual access to opportunity in New York City. First, you need accessibility. You need to make sure that people have connections to the people in government who are making decisions. You need to have capacity. We need to make sure that we have businesses that have the ability and the capacity to deliver on business. We need to make sure that we have accountability so that everyone is accountable for driving these goals forward. We need to have a sustainability. We need to make sure that as programs enter, as businesses begin doing business with the city, they can begin to grow and take on ever larger business so that over time, they don't need MWBE program, they can compete on an open playing field. And the bill that was passed in the Assembly and the Senate helped us move that way in two very important ways. One is it increases the discretionary threshold that the city has for spending. So up until now, the city's discretionary spending limit was $20,000. The current bill increases that limit to $150,000. Now that is critical for a bunch of reasons. But at its heart, what it does is it means that minority and women businesses can compete for city dollars without going through some of the laborious paperwork and laborious procurement processes that normally city contracting has to go through. This increases access for minority and women-owned businesses. It addresses capacity because you don't have to have a huge back office to compete. It addresses sustainability because once you start doing business, once you show that you can get your feet wet at a relatively modest contract at $150,000, you can then begin to build the experience and the know-how and the reputation that allows you to compete for ever larger contracts. So just that alone, we think can have a tremendous impact by allowing us to get more and more business into the hand of minority and women-owned businesses. So that's a critical goal there. The other thing that the bill did, it introduces best value contracting, as you said. Now, we know that when the city is doing business and is awarding a contract, of course, two things are critical. One is what is the price? It's got to be a competitive price. And two, it's got to be for a business that can actually do the work, right? Does the business actually have the ability to do the work? And that second part is never negotiable. Anytime we award business to someone, it's got to be to a business that can actually deliver on the work. That's what the taxpayers expect, and it's what we as a city need. But price, although it's critically important, and of course, we're trying to get the best value to the city by having people provide competitive bids. We all know in our lives the lowest price is not always the best price. If you want some work done in your plumbing, I can do the work for $50. I wouldn't turn on the faucet when I was done with it, right? Lowest price is not always the most critical factor. And what we want is the authority to think about the other things that matter to us when we award those contracts. So things like, what is your history of labor relations? Are you going to hire locally? Are you going to hire New York City workers to do the work? But also, is the business a minority and women-owned business? We know that if we can think about that and consider that in making awards, we think we're giving more value to the city by expanding opportunity to more businesses in the city. And over time, that works in the city's interest, because again, the more you have MWBEs that are competing on these contracts, the more they're getting a footing, the more experience they're getting. Then over time, you'll have more and more firms who are able to compete for more and more business. And ultimately, that works in the city's favor.
Sure. And a follow-up to that, obviously a certain portion of this, there has been some fraud and abuse, whatever percentage that may be, people who take advantage of the system, put a front with, a woman or a minority when it's actually possibly a white man running the company, getting these contracts. District Attorney Cyrus Vance in 2014 did a really in-depth report on this. So how do you, sort of counter that risk, but also do things like this to open up opportunities further?
That's a great question. Well, look, we want to make sure that we're getting opportunity to the hand of actual MWBE. So we have as big an interest in anyone as making sure that there is no fraud in our system. So one of the big goals that the mayor announced last year is a goal of what would essentially be doubling the number of certified MWBEs in New York City. And we're getting to 9,000 MWBEs, and we're well on our way. In fact, just a month ago, we announced the 5,000th certified business in New York City. As a side note, this amazing guy, MC Transportation, an immigrant business, a guy, Dominican immigrant, now started a transportation business in the city. Did not have any city contracts yet, but he's now on the pathway to getting city contracts. So our certification process is rigorous. And when we certify a business, first of all, on the paperwork, we're making sure that it's truly a business, and we look for and require proof that someone is who they say they are and that the ownership is what it says it is. But then we have teams that go out and actually do audits and visit businesses and make sure that the businesses are what they say they are. And we withdraw certification when we find that they are not. And if you've ever done business in New York City, you know that we have a very robust Department of Investigation, which is committed to making sure that there is no fraud in the program. So it's a valid question. It's something for people to be concerned about, but it's something that we are focused on. But like anything else, you can't, I think there's always a risk of allowing the exception of fraudulent behavior to control the whole conversation. We can't let the tail wag the dog. Of course, we want to make sure that we have barriers to making sure that there's not fraudulent businesses who are claiming MWBE status. But we can't allow that to stop us from doing the work of going out to businesses, making the process seamless, making it no harder than it has to be for a firm to get certified and stay certified. And this certification is so critical because it is in so many ways a gateway to everything else. One of the things that we know, which I was sort of surprised to see, but it's a testament to the great work that we do, is that if you look at the businesses, the MWBEs, who are getting business, 2/3 of them have gone through capacity building programs run by the city's Department of Small Business Services. To get access to those programs, you have to be certified. When you're certified, you get on the city database, which means that it's easier for city agencies and for prime contractors to find you. And a lot of what we do as a city is the proactive work of matching those prime contractors and potential minority and women subcontractors together. So this is really like the first step in our business. And so we need to make sure that people know that they shouldn't be afraid or intimidated about going through the process of getting certified. Absolutely, we'll make sure that fraud is not a part of our system, but that should not stop any of the amazing entrepreneurs that live in the city from taking the steps to walk through that door and doing business with the city.
And then I'd like to draw an analogy. There's obviously been a lot of attention to Rikers Island and the effort to close the complex there, and the goal now is a 10-year period. Some people say, well, let's do it in 1 year, let's do it in 3 years. But here with MWBEs, 2021, why not 2018? Why not 2019? Why do you need that time to hit that 30% target?
Yeah, I thought our target was ambitious. Look, let's be realistic. This is hard work. We're talking about very, very difficult work for any number of reasons. Part of it is cultural, and I talked about accountability being a big part of this work. We had to change the culture in all of the city agencies that are responsible for doing business. And it's not because city agencies or the ACOs or the procurement officers have an intention to be exclusionary. They're intending to keep people out of business. All of our city agencies are under tremendous pressure to do their work on time, on budget. If you're the Department of Transportation, if you're the Department of Sanitation, whoever you are, you're under a lot of pressure to deliver big projects on time and on budget. And there is a natural tendency when you are that person doing procurement to call the firm that you know, the firm that did the work for you, good work for you last year and the year before and the year before. But the problem is when you have that approach, you then are ossifying privilege. When you keep going back to the same people, you are making it impossible for new businesses, for new voices, for new faces to enter business. So to do that work takes time. It takes time to educate our city officials, to create structures of accountability. So right now, for the first time, the mayor sees on a quarterly basis what is the utilization rate of every city agency? To what extent are they using MWBEs? Who's at the top and who's at the bottom? Who's made the biggest jumps and who's not making progress? We're bringing together our chief procurement officers and our commissioners together on a regular basis. We are placing MWBE officers in all of our city agencies. So we're doing the work, but it takes time. You can't flick a switch. You have to start to change behavior. Capacity is another example. We know that we need to give minority and women-owned businesses a chance to grow, to do business, and we need to address systematically the obstacles that stand in their way. So one of the things that we know is a real barrier to agencies that want to do business with us is capacity, and often financial capacity. Can you access capital? Can you access loan funds to begin to do the work, to begin to buy products and services before you get paid? If you're doing a construction project, do you have access to surety bonds that can be required on city contracting work? So you have all these barriers, and so now we're putting into place resources to help address these issues. We put into place, just over the last year, three new financing funds designed to address capacity barriers. We just announced recently a surety bond fund where firms can access up to $500,000 or half of the cash collateral required, whichever is less, in order to make sure they can compete for dollars. We put in place a loan fund, a contract finance fund, with what we think is the lowest rate in the country, 3%. You can borrow up to $500,000. And we've got some great businesses. One of our first businesses, Jocelyn Taylor, Taylor Made Construction, a firm that's been doing great work helping to do construction after Hurricane Sandy, has been able to access contract fund, and this is a perfect example, right? Literally rebuilding the city, in part through the access of capital, which otherwise would have been a barrier from this highly qualified, highly competent firm to do this work. And EDC have an emergency developers fund. And again, these are not necessarily firms that are doing work for the city, but again, by creating access to funds for these businesses, they can get their feet wet, they can get more experience, and eventually be able to compete for larger city contracts and city projects. But that takes time. Putting the funds together takes time. Getting it out into the world takes time. So we think we have a very ambitious time frame. It's been decades and decades and decades that the city has not been open for business. It's been decades that we have not expressed a real and meaningful commitment to expanding opportunity for minority and women-owned businesses. And we think our time frame is ambitious. I can tell you that when we established that quick time frame, there was a lot of pushback about saying, can you do it that quickly? But one thing I know, if we don't set ambitious goals, you'll never achieve them. If you don't set a big North Star, you'll never get there. You'll never be able to get there. So we think it's an ambitious goal, but we think it's a doable goal. And our intention is to hit that goal and set a new one, because we know that the people in the city can do extraordinary things if given the chance, and we just want to make sure we're giving them the chance.
And just a quick follow-up there. Do you get much resistance from the many existing contractors? Are there groups that companies that get a lot of big contracts that are worried that they're going to see their piece of the pie shrink?
Well, look, I think the truth of the matter is that change is scary. Change is scary for anyone, and certainly, if you are successful in any given system, you're going to be worried sometimes about the change that's coming. But what I have to say is I've been really heartened and encouraged by how much support we've gotten from everyone, from unions to building trades council to all sorts of industries and businesses who, even if they don't agree with everything that we're doing, they don't agree with every part of what we're doing, have stood up, said clearly, that they believe that the city can do better and they want to stand with us. And what makes this work happen is our partnerships, and we partner with everyone, and so I know that there is always fear and concerns about what can happen, but for the most part, what I have experienced is not pushback. What I've experienced for the most part is partnership. And then the work is getting around the places where we disagree and getting to places where we can work together.
And we just have a few minutes left, but I wanted to pivot slightly, to touch on at least one or two items going on in the news right now. You also oversee, I believe, the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. Mm-hmm. You're the son of immigrants, and obviously the Supreme Court allowed part of this travel ban to go forward in the interim while they rule on the full ban. I'm referring to the travel ban targeting primarily Muslim mm-hmm. countries. What does that mean for you personally and from a policy perspective
well,
at the
look,
city level?
I think the key part there is the interim part that you mentioned. Courts around the country who have consistently said that the president's ban is a ban on Muslims, and we know this because he said it. We don't have to guess. It doesn't take a lot of investigation to understand. He said it consistently and regularly, and we know that that is unconstitutional. It is against the Constitution, it is against the First Amendment, it is against every principle of what this country stands for. So what we have to make sure that New Yorkers understand, and New Yorkers of every color, New Yorkers of every status, we have to make sure that New Yorkers understand that New York values mean something, and we will not stop being New York City, not for any reason and not for anyone. This is a city built by immigrants, immigrants like my parents, immigrants like I'm sure many of you in this room. Immigrants still make this city go. Most of our businesses are run by immigrants and owned by immigrants. And the danger here is that fear-mongering, keeps people in the shadows, keeps people from leading their full lives. And that is something that undermines all of us. It makes our city less safe. It makes our city less healthy. It makes our city less educated. People are afraid to sign up for school or talk to the police. So what I want everybody to understand is that, there are a lot of strong advocates fighting the legal fight in Washington, and we certainly stand with those advocates. But on the ground here, New York City is a city of immigrants, will remain a city of immigrants. That's why we have things like IDNYC, the largest municipal ID program in the country, because over 1 million New Yorkers have those cards, and those cards say, regardless of your immigrant status, you are part of our city, you are welcome here, and that's not going to change. The interim order from the Supreme Court's not going to change that. Nonsense on Twitter is not going to change that. None of that's going to change who we are and where we stand in the city.
And then just one last question. You were charged with implementing the city's universal pre-K program. It's generally seen as a success story of the de Blasio administration. And there's been a lot of ink written now about the possible lapse of mayoral control of schools. It looks like there actually might well be a special session tomorrow. I don't know if a deal's been made yet. But I would wonder, again, if that did lapse at the end of the month, what would that mean, if anything, for UPK?
Well, there are some dreams we don't want to dream about or things we don't want to imagine. I got to say, the whole debate about governance of the schools, I know can feel very esoteric to people. It feels like some sort of random inside Albany question. But people have to understand this is not esoteric. This is not just a technical question. This goes to the heart of what it takes to do big things as a city. So, pre-K is something we're very proud of. We went from 19,000 kids in full-day pre-K. A year and a half later, we had almost 70,000 kids. We had a seat for everyone who had them. This was a massive operational undertaking. It required clear leadership and clear direction within the Department of Education, but more than that, across city agencies, because part of the story about pre-K is that it was more about than the Department of Education's work. It was the health department, making sure that buildings were licensed. It was the fire department, making sure buildings were safe. It was the buildings department. It was the Administration for Children's Services, the Department of Design and Construction. All these city agencies coming together on tight timelines, changing the way they did business to get this work done. That would not have been possible if all of these folks didn't have clear lines of accountability to one mayor. So when you see the city doing extraordinary things in education, where there's computer science for all, free after-school programs in every middle school in New York City, pre-K for all, soon coming this fall to a borough near you, 3K for all. All these things are possible because we have a clear, coordinated set of accountability and because we have a mayor who articulates these things as priorities. Not having mayoral control imperils our ability to do big things. We saw how this system worked, and it wasn't pretty and it wasn't nice. And the weirdest thing about this whole debate to me, I'm a public servant now, but I've never worked in electoral politics. The strangest thing to me about this whole thing is that no one actually believes that the alternative is better. Like, no one stands up and says, well, actually, it's great to have elected school boards in 32 districts that are elected by tiny minorities of the people that are not publicly accountable and that are raft with fraud and have no ability to execute. Like, no one's, that doesn't exactly make a good billboard. So what I have to hope, and what we all have to hope, is that the folks in Albany who work for us will do their job for the children of New York City and put the needs of children first and do what literally everyone knows has to happen. And I have to have confidence that happens, that's going to happen, and we're going to keep working as though we have a system that makes sense.
Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. So let's give the Deputy Mayor a hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Appreciate it.